Well, welcome to our workshop. We've got a full house, a full room today. My name is Connie Schaefer. I'm the director for the Center for Faculty Excellence, and we're bringing this to you because you asked for it. We had a couple different groups on campus who... It's only for the recording, so I'll talk louder. So this is because you asked for it, right? There were a couple different deans who came to me asking for this, as well as some other units across campus. So we did a panel in the fall about working with students who are neurodiverse. We got a small little grant that we could repeat that panel again in the spring and then offer this workshop. So I am going to turn things over to our presenters and let them introduce themselves because they are the experts and they're the ones who are going to lead us through this afternoon's activities. But thank you for being here. Thank you for advocating that we have classrooms where all students can learn and offices where all students feel welcome. So Mitzi, I will turn things over to you. Oh, Nick, is it Nick going first?
All right. My name is Nick Uguma. I'm the director of the Accessibility Services Center in H&K. So just for a little bit of context, I'm not sure how much this is in the slides, but particularly when we're talking neurodiversity. So my office serves about 1,000 registered students, and depending on how students self-identify in terms of neurodiversity, probably about 35% of those could be considered in this population, so depending on disability diagnosis and where they self-identify. So it's a pretty significant number of students, and those are just the ones that choose to disclose to our office. So.
Hi friends, my name is Kate Earnhardt. I'm an academic advisor in the Division of Continuing Studies, and also full disclosure, I am also a neurodivergent person. So I have some, I like to call it street smarts, not so much book smarts when it comes to this. So that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Mitzi Ritzman. I am a faculty member in the the College of Education, Health and Human Sciences, Department of Special Education and Communication Disorders.
Hi everyone, I'm Troy Romero. I'm the chair and a professor in the Goodrich Scholarship Program, and I'll tell you more why I'm here.
So here is our brief agenda for you today. We're going to review some terminology that we talked about at our panel presentation earlier in the semester. We're going to talk about some general communication strategies. I know we have both faculty and staff in the room, and so we want to be sure that we are being receptive to the questions that you provided in preparation for this workshop. We're going to do some review of supporting students in the classroom. And we're going to talk about what it looks like when students start to burn out, how to support them, and some strategies to support them in self-advocacy as well. Then we're going to talk briefly about neurodiversity affirming practices in general, again, regardless of what your role here is on campus, and then a review of some of the resources that are available.
So I'm going to lead the reviewing of terminology. So there's a few different terms around neurodiversity, neurodivergent, things like that. So neurodiversity really encompasses the whole spectrum of diversity. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are a neurodivergent person. It's the diversity of all human brains. So we all think differently. We all act differently. There's no, as it says here, that there's no, quote unquote, right way of thinking. Learning, behaving, though, we do have to account for differences in cultural differences, things like that. But it basically means that differences are not deficits. So like it says, diversity of all people, not just those who actually do have neurological or neurodevelopmental conditions. So here's a chart that I found that I really, really liked because it really, I felt really encompassed all the ways that people can be neurodiverse. So, here's the person in the middle, and maybe they've got ADHD, but they might also be on the autism spectrum. So there's all different ways that these can kind of overlap. And you can even acquire neurodiversity, like neurodivergent ways of thinking. Those, I think they come more from maybe like injuries, things like that. I think it's difficult to acquire a neurodiversity or a neurodiverse condition, as opposed to all of these other conditions. You were born with it and you're gonna live with it for the rest of your life. So then we've got neurotypical and neurodivergent. So neurotypical is it's an informal label. It's a label that people within the neurodivergent community kind of label people that are, quote unquote, normal. The ways that they might think, act, react to certain things are considered in the normal standard. So they do not have a neurological disorder. So like I said, it is an informal label. It's not anything that, a clinician would say like, yes, you are neurotypical. But it is important to remember that neurotypical does not equal quote unquote normal. It just means that your behaviors fall within expected boundaries. So like I said earlier, that is accounting for, cultural differences, things like that. Like some cultures, it might be very rude to look people in the eye, whereas in our culture, it's considered a neurotypical trait to look somebody in the eye and sustain a conversation with them. So then neurodivergent, this is a label given to someone whose brain works in an unexpected way. So they might not, people that have neurodiverse disorders, they might react in a way that is not to the societal norm. It is a term that was created as an alternative to neuroatypical, as a way to make it to not other people that have neurodivergent disorders. So then there's just a few other terminologies, especially that I thought was important. So there's executive function. So everyone has executive function. These are behaviors and processes that our brains do that control like working memory, which is why sometimes like people, especially with ADHD, they might be very forgetful because executive function covers working memory, and working memory might not be the greatest with someone with ADHD, for example. Cognitive flexibility, inhibition control. So, saying things and you're like, oh, why did I say that? Or, you can't stop yourself from picking up that new little treatle because your impulse control doesn't work as it should. But it also controls higher level functioning as well. So things like planning, reasoning, also problem solving, these can all be affected by your executive function. So in the opposite of that, executive dysfunction is when those processes are disrupted in your brain. Masking, this is a term that we use in the neurodivergent community when we're talking about hiding or camouflaging our neurodivergent symptoms so that we appear normal to people. So time blindness is a term that the neurodiversity community did create. So it especially talks about how you have no awareness of time. Time doesn't exist the same way it does for a neurodivergent person as it does for someone that's neurotypical. So we might, I'm going to say we, because like I'm a part of the neurodivergent community. I love us. So we might hyper focus on something and then be like, oh, I haven't eaten and it's actually been 5 hours and I didn't even realize. And so you don't even realize that your body is telling you maybe you should drink some water and maybe you should eat something because it has been a few hours. Or you might be doing something that you really, really hate and you're like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 3 hours now, and you look at your watch and it's actually been like 5 minutes. So it's this you can't quite compute time unless you're actually like watching a clock as it passes. A lot of also neurodivergent people will describe feeling like there's not enough time in a day. because of all the things that we have to do during the day. And so that's kind of a symptom of time blindness. Here's some general communication strategies. These are especially things that I've kind of put into my advising practice. So number one, don't assume anything about anyone. Really, don't assume someone's ability or disability status, especially for advisors. We are not, we're not afforded the information that someone may have accommodations in place. And so we won't know if someone has a disability, especially a neurodivergent disability, because those can often present as invisible disabilities. We won't know unless they tell us. And we are not to solicit that information. We're not to say, hey, I think you might be ADHD. And then they're like, oh, wow, that was really insensitive because I'm actually not. So we can't solicit that information. So just don't assume anyone's ability or disability status. Also, don't assume that everyone is okay with touching. I think that's something that we're all pretty well aware of as higher educational professionals. We don't really touch students, really. But also with like the pandemic, everyone got out of habit of like handshaking, things like that. But don't assume that people do want to shake hands as a form of a greeting. They might be very like touch averse, and so that might be something that could be very triggering for them. It's also like things like high fives. I put hugs in there, but like you really shouldn't be hugging your students unless it's like graduation and they ask you if you want, like they can hug you. So I'm glad we're all on the same page with that. So, but eye contact is also something that this goes for too. Some people are just very averse to eye contact. They might not be able to concentrate fully when they're looking someone in the eye and having a conversation, because in their head they're thinking maintain eye contact, and then they don't hear anything that the other person has said, but they look like they understood everything because they're masking and they're unintentionally kind of mirroring the emotions and like the facial expressions of the person that they're talking to. So some people, they actually are really paying attention to you much better if they're looking away because they're not focusing on maintaining your eye contact. Use clear language when you're meeting with students. So I'm a very like sarcastic person, but also I try to like reel that in a little bit. So you just have to try to avoid euphemisms, implied meanings, especially. You just want to speak clearly to students, expectations that they might have, things like that. So you just want to speak clearly, give good directions, clear directions. And also, I didn't put this in here, but one of the things that I try to always remember to put into my advising practice, especially with my younger students, because I do advise mainly adult learners. Some of my younger students, I try to remember, or try to remind them rather, to, like, it's okay to question me. Like, you are the expert of you. It's okay to say to me, actually, I don't think that would be great, or can you remind me again why you want me to do this? I try to establish that it is okay to kind of push back at me because I'm not an expert on that student. You can always ask if there's anything that you can do to help make a meeting more accommodating. So this might work really well with perhaps like the intake interview or intake meeting that someone like a staff assistant might do in an office. That could be something that you kind of build into your office's practices. Having that person say, is there anything that Kate can do to help make your make your meeting more accommodating? And that might look like, are you light averse? A lot of people in the neurodivergent community, we hate what we call the big light. It can be very distracting for us. And if you ever come over to my house, that big light ain't ever on. I don't like it. It's too bright. It gives me headaches and I can't focus on anything other than that dang light. So, but some people might need the bright light. It might just be a better way for them to be able to concentrate. If you work in an office where maybe there's not, like you don't have an office with a door, maybe you share an office with someone, or you have cubicles, maybe you could see if that student might need a quieter space to be able to concentrate. I know for me, if I'm in a really loud area, I'm trying to hear what this person behind me is saying, but also them, and that person looks like they're having fun, and so I want to know what they're talking about. And so for me, having a quiet space would be the best way to have like me be able to pay attention, so you can always see if there's maybe an alternative quiet space that you can arrange for a student when you're meeting with them. And also maybe like little fidget toys, and that could even be like pipe cleaners. I've seen those. People really like those a lot. Just little things where, you know, a student, if they maybe have a little more hyperactivity in their neurodivergence, something that they can kind of like play with and be able to focus the physical hyperactive aspects of their neurodivergence, so that they're kind of they don't really know that they're doing it, and then they can pay attention a lot better in your conversation. Also, if you have the time to provide concise verbal or written, especially written instructions, being able to break down maybe a big task for a student that's very nervous about it, or it's maybe got a lot of little tasks. If you can break down task A has micro task here, micro task there, micro task here, that can really help with students that are neurodiverse, because they can, check that off, okay, check that off, and then check that off. Oh, now I've got the whole big thing done. So it can help things feel a lot more manageable. Yeah. One thing I've done just in the past couple years when I've just taken a class for fun, because I work at a university and therefore I obviously like learning. So, and we've had group projects. One of the things that my instructor did was one person takes the lead, and it always ended up being me, because I was I'm the advisor in the group, but also like I'm taking undergraduate courses and something I have a master's degree in. So kind of like helping the littles get to where they need to go. So she would always say, I want one person that is communicating with me and giving me updates on things. And she would also make it really clear, like if you aren't participating, I do expect people to tattle on you. That is the only time I will tattle on someone. So she liked to get regular updates from us, and it was kind of one person was leading the conversation, or not the conversation, the meetings. But in terms of how you might help guide them, I don't know, that might be better for someone that actually teaches.
Just to add on to, I think Kate's ideas are exactly right. And I would say to perhaps have a group agreement right away where you have those roles delineated, who's going to be in charge of which elements of the project. Maybe the neurodivergent student doesn't choose to be the communicator with the instructor. Maybe they do. Again, individual differences, but having that really clearly lined out ahead of time, a group agreement, everybody signs off on it, and then having those kind of mini deadlines along the way where you can check in and say, hey, how's this going? That could be individually or that could be per group, but just setting up that structure ahead of time so that there's those kind of milestones before. Oftentimes group projects are pretty big, so milestones along the way could be helpful as well.
I want to add a couple things to this too, because one, depending on the neurodiversity, some students it's an invisible one, so you don't see it. So one thing I would say is make sure before every class, let them know if you're neurodivergent, register with the Office of Accessibility Services so they can get those accommodations, so you know them coming in. The other thing that's kind of important for me on both the teaching side, but also from the perspective of students is, I would really connect all my course assignments to the student learning outcomes, because I know group work, so one thing that we know is most of the time students who are neurodivergent, many times it doesn't stop them from qualifying to be college students, right? They get in, they're highly qualified, they have the grade point average and everything else. But college is, again, I just throw this out there. There's no research that's been done to necessarily identify this, but it's probably 70% social. And that's not necessarily a learning outcome that you have in a classroom, but it's a requirement. And so sometimes people will, myself included, I've done this, I've assigned group work that really isn't necessary, but I'm like, oh, we do group work in college. That's what we do. Identify and make sure first that that's something that you need to do for an outcome, because if a student is neurodivergent and they qualify for the class, and they're doing group work that doesn't help them learn what they're supposed to. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. Like, I think it applies in several areas, but be very thoughtful about what you're assigning and whether it actually gets them to the learning that they need. I think most of us do this, but that invisible disability for many of our students, they'll drop a class. They'll leave a class because they have to do this. Or they'll get a poor grade and students in the class will say, I don't want to work with them. And suddenly they're ostracized and no one did anything wrong, right? So it just takes a little bit of forward thinking to kind of work that out, so.
Any other questions before I move on? So this brings us to the communication scenario. So I pretty quickly yesterday did make these up. So there's 3 scenarios here. Student says they're having a hard time concentrating in class. Number 2 is student is not excited or interested in the class material, and so they find it difficult to work on their homework. And then number 3 is student is often confused by the euphemisms or the sarcasm the instructor employs in class that everyone else but them seems to understand. So at this point, I think, was it that we were going to have little breakouts, or was it just like kind of talking a little bit through? Okay, so should we have, I wish I had thought up 4 things. Oops. Other communication scenario, presenter was not fully prepared. So I guess maybe we'll do, should we do like group 1 does question 1, or like scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3, and then group 4, just choose whichever one. Choose which one calls to you. Oh yes, so let's say like student, you're in an advising meeting with your student and they're saying, I'm having a ton of trouble concentrating and I can't, I'm really enjoy the material, but it's so hard for me to concentrate. And then I go home and I try to work on my coursework and everything else is like taking over and I'm just having trouble concentrating. So like, what are some, tips, tricks, things that you would explore with that student? Same for like number 2, the student, it's a class that they have to take, for their major maybe, and they're just like, oh my God, I'm not excited by this. It's really hard for me to devote the time I need to being successful in the class. It's not that I can't be successful. It's that my brain is just like, where's this roadblock? And then, same for number 3, you could just talk through what are some things that you would tell a student, kind of advise them, or let's say you are the instructor and a student feels comfortable saying, I just don't understand like some of the stuff you say, and I just want to make sure that I'm not, I'm not writing stuff down that doesn't make sense, things like that. So basically just how you would talk through the scenarios with a student and what you might kind of bring to them for things that they could do to alleviate these anxieties a little bit. Yeah, I would, not that I'm like, there's not a right or wrong answer to any of these. I've had students several times in our advising meetings talk about this, and sometimes in a lot of what I do is I will self-disclose. I'll say, man, that sounds a lot like, you have to tread lightly, but because you can't tell them, I think that you might have a neurodivergent disorder. So I'll say, yeah, that sounds a lot like the struggles that I went through when I was in school, and it was just, I was having so much trouble concentrating, and then I can't quite think of what I've actually said in that moment, but it'll be, and I'll say, come to find out I have ADHD, and that I have trouble concentrating not because of I'm not interested in the subject, but because my brain is thinking about all the 1,800 other things I have to do today, and I got to feed the cat, and I got to go do this, and I got to, like, the next week is this thing that I hate that's coming up. And so that has helped students to really feel better when I've shared my own kind of diagnoses with them. Not to say, I think you should seek out a diagnosis, but for them to say, a lot of times they go, I've been wondering if I have this. And that makes me feel a lot better to know that someone that I look up to is also living with this thing, which then makes me like melt into a puddle and like want to go tell my mom that someone said something nice to me. I'll also kind of share towards the end some kind of like life hacks, some tips and tricks on maybe how to help re-engage a student when they're not really interested in something. But I won't like spoiler alert it right now. Okay, gonna turn it over to Troy, not Mitzi, whose name I do love to say, by the way. So I'm gonna turn it over to Troy now to talk about supporting students in the classroom.
Thank you, Kate. Nobody likes saying the name Troy. I don't even like saying the name. It's a monosyllabic name. Karen. So some of you came to our presentation. We've had a couple of presentations on this, so some of this material is what we covered there. Some of you weren't there, so I want to go over this to make sure we kind of cover some of this. But it's also really important. So we've already talked about, we might have students who have different needs, and there are some things that we can do. Have them connect with the resources on campus that help them. Our Office of Accessibility Services really helps them. If they want to self-diagnose, there are some barriers sometimes to that. Some students don't want a diagnosis. They don't want to have a label, so they don't want to go and get those services. They're okay on their own. And they may have been up to a certain point, but college is hard. College is different. So the resources that they need might be different, and that might be even more self-isolating for them. And something that Dr. Shear brought up, we live in different times now too. So college was a little, through the history of college, it's been a little inaccessible, right? So there are certain people who get into college who have the capacity to learn, and now what we're trying to do is open the accessibility to everybody. But that means we have people with different needs coming in who have the competency to be here, but they might need other resources that we should be able to provide them with. And it's hard to sometimes do it on an individual basis. Nick, on another slide would tell you the numbers of people who are in his office have grown, especially in certain areas. I mentioned last time in our last training, 20 years ago, I think there was one person who self-identified on the autism spectrum. And that is not the case anymore, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we live in different times. Part of the reason why I'm here is because I worked with Mitzi for a number of years with students who were young adults on the autism spectrum. And many of them have strengths, it's a spectrum, right? But many of them have strengths that academically they excel. They exceed expectations on a college level. But that doesn't help them get through some of this stuff, so they might not even be diagnosed. They're identified as really strong in certain areas, and then they struggle. So, those are all things that we can cover and discuss in a different way. But this leads us to this idea of universal design. So universal design is meant to help us for all students. This will certainly help students who are in the marginalized areas or who have specific needs, but this will, these kind of these kinds of tactics will help everybody. And that's also part of the reason why I'm here. I'm a chair of a department now, and I can't tell you how many times I've had faculty have issues with students, and if they had just changed a little bit in their syllabus, the problems, they don't go away, but they're ameliorated, right? And we can make it a lot easier just by employing a couple of things. Something else that I say a lot is a lot of faculty members are not taught to be teachers. They're content experts. So conveying the learning to students may not be our strength. We have lots of resources with Connie and Center for Faculty Excellence and some of the people in this room. But universal design is kind of we talk about a hack. It's an easy way to kind of help make your class accessible. So it comes down to a few things. One is multiple means of representation. Try and represent what you're teaching to students in many ways. We'll cover some examples of this in a little bit. Also, how the how of learning, how they can, the assignments that we assign in class, how can we vary those? Again, so we're still meeting the student learning outcomes. What do we need them to learn from being in our class? But are there lots of ways to do it? And what are some of the ways that might be more creative? Although TikTok might be going away, I don't know. And I'm not a TikToker anyways, but maybe offering students an option to do something like that. Like, again, multiple ways that may not be in our wheelhouse, but can help them still learn. And then engagement, the why of learning. I will say the thing that I've learned more as I've become a little older is my job of connecting with students usually leads to them learning more than me being disconnected from them. So having them understand why they're there, why I'm there, oftentimes breaks down some barriers for everybody. So these are just some multiple ways to do it. Supports all students. Again, everyone knows their role a little easier. And with that, we have a handout.
So in your packet of materials, you should have a handout that has 3 different columns that are represented in those multiple means of representation, action and expression, and engagement. We are today going to focus on the top row. The top row is labeled access. And that's really where we want you to maybe start to think about your syllabus, your course design. One of the things that we asked you to do in preparation for today was to bring your syllabus or an assignment, and you're having some time here in just a little bit to start to consider these elements and perhaps just a slight, maybe a small tweak of, again, we're just asking you to think about one of these areas. But this handout is a really great reference. The website at the bottom is also a great resource if you are interested in diving a little bit deeper. But we want you to think about, again, that engagement that Troy talked about last is really helping students understand why they're there, what's their interest. Kate talked about, am I excited for this? Am I engaged in this class? Yes or no? And let's talk about why and how we can support students in. Maybe not everybody loves the content area. Maybe it's a gen ed class, but there's still ways that we can provide those options to support them in being more engaged. Representation. So how are you displaying information? And again, we're going to go over some examples, but thinking about, again, the back table talked about announcements in class, announcements via Canvas, announcements via email, but that repetition is really helpful as well. And then the action and expression. So what are you asking for from students and providing perhaps some choices for how they are, to Troy's point, meeting those student learning outcomes. So this is a really nice reference for you as you start to think about what that might look like. So this is basically what I just said, but we want you to, again, start to think about those 3 different types of areas as you are revising, and you'll have some time for conversation today as well. So one of the things that came through in our questions and preparation for the workshop was online learning. We all had a crash course in online learning when COVID arrived, right? So even if we weren't using Canvas as much previously, we're maybe using it more now that we're on the backside of COVID. But there are things that Canvas provides that are really helpful when we start to think about UDL. So again, everybody does an instructor introduction first day of class, right? Can you also maybe provide an introduction within your Canvas module? Certainly doing that within your online courses, but also face-to-face courses. So if students, again, maybe weren't fully engaged that day or whatever the case might be, to provide that introduction. So that's just an example from one of my classes. I'm a big Nebraska football fan. It just is what it is. But providing photos, I think, is a way to kind of personalize the information. Again, they'll see you face to face, but also providing that information in another way for them to access later. And then again, online courses, this is kind of built into the course design, but even for face-to-face classes, if you're using Canvas, providing kind of a course tour, if you will, to help them figure out where all the stuff is. Every instructor organizes their class very, very differently. And so you can imagine if you're taking, 4 or 5 classes and you're trying to find an assignment, well, is it in the files section? Is it in a weekly module? So figuring out how you can communicate your personal organization to students so that they don't spend 10 minutes every time they're on Canvas trying to find whatever it is that they're trying to access. So the kinds of things, again, that we learned, I think, more about during COVID, we can still carry through for our face-to-face coursework. Options for communicating, again, Lisa's example in the back of announcements, same. So providing an opportunity for them to meet with you face-to-face. Some students see office hours and they think that's when you're in your office working and they can't communicate with you. So kind of talking with them about what office hours are. Do you like Canvas messaging? I personally don't love getting emails via Canvas. Sometimes they get lost and the responses are formatting's not great, so I prefer that students email me via Outlook. If they use Canvas, fine, but giving them that information ahead of time so that they have those options to, again, get in touch with you when they need to do that. And then also providing information beyond written text or lecture. So we are so blessed with the kinds of information that is readily accessible. Figuring out how to maximize that and bring that into the classroom is really helpful for students when we're thinking about that multiple means of representation and access. So anything that is outside, I think it's on the next slide, there are some examples. So I use a lot of YouTube videos, so obviously previewed, but also giving students the opportunity to maybe go out and find some examples of their own, recognizing that not everything that they're going to learn about that particular topic is within the context of that textbook chapter or your lecture or whatever's happening in the classroom. Accessible slide presentations, PowerPoint, so making sure if you're posting something and you want students to be able to access that later, do you consistently upload that in a PDF format? Do you consistently upload the slides themselves so that they can start to understand how to access that information? I had a conversation with a student just this semester about something that, when we talk about high school teaching, you might expect that students come in knowing. He didn't understand that bold-faced terms in the chapter was an indication of something important to pay attention to. So really helping students understand how to highlight that information. And then again, websites. So we talk about open access. If you have an opportunity to have open access materials in your course, obviously that reduces the cost for students, but it also gives them an opportunity to go out and get additional information as well. And this is just an example. I actually just pulled this from this week's assignment. So an introduction to communication disorders. I'm a speech language pathologist by training. So our focus this week is on motor speech disorders. So they will have the chapter from the textbook as well as lecture materials, but then giving them an opportunity to go out and hear what these disorders sound like really helps to gel that information. So we can talk conceptually about that, but if you don't have personal experience or clinical experience, understanding the difference between what dysarthria sounds like versus apraxia is not something they probably have access to. So giving them an opportunity to go out and look for that and then tell me about it, and then in a variety of ways. So a written summary, they can submit a video, or for students who like to be really creative, students seem to love Canva. I don't, but they love Canva, so a creative way for them to submit that information as well.
So we're still talking about like assignments, and the one thing that I would like to I guess reiterate is part of the UDI and the universal design and connecting with our students probably starts with us remembering that we're all like human beings, and we're all we all have our stuff. And so if you start from where I come back to what are the student learning outcomes and what's the best way to do it. If you have an attendance policy, I work in a program that has an attendance policy, and our attendance policy says that they can miss up to 3 days a semester in a class that meets 3 times a week. And if they miss more than that, then their scholarship comes under review. But if they miss less than that, then they probably shouldn't be penalized for missing in the class. So the design of the class should allow for them to miss 3 times. And it allows them to be human beings without saying that. But a lot of their issues might be invisible. I only bring this up because some of you might see me texting. This is this was not planned, but I have something going on in my life that might require me to leave right now. And I'll share it with you because I hope that if I share it with you, you'll consider sharing it with your students, and your students will be more open with you. My mother's in the middle stages of Alzheimer's, and so I'm one of the caretakers for her, and I'm getting text right now that my mom has an issue. I don't need to share that with you. And usually that won't impact my class, but it may once, twice, maybe 3 times in a semester. And that seems reasonable both for the students and for the faculty. Like, you should be able to miss a couple classes and not deter what they're learning and what you're teaching them. If it goes beyond that, then that's a different issue. If you're not learning what you're supposed to, or if I'm not in a class enough to teach them, then that should impact my grade as an instructor. But if it doesn't, we should have some grace built into a class so someone can maximize their learning. And some of the examples that we have, that I have here, try and do that. So we try and come up with ways for students to demonstrate their learning in the assignment, and also how that's delivered. So we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Kate. So this is just an example that I have of different ways students have. You don't need to read all the details. My class is a lifespan psychology, lifespan development class. Some of your classes are different. If you're teaching a hard science, how you would acclimate this would be different. If you're teaching an intro class, it's different. But I think if you can get creative, the idea here is I'm trying to engage my students to say, this is an application paper. How you apply what we're learning can be a mainstream application, and not like a TikTok video or something like that, but I give them ideas. Go to reliable sources. There's more detail in the assignment, but this essentially says, go to these reliable sources. Or if you want to go to another one, come to me, and you can do a mainstream application of the psychological topics that we're covering in class. Or if you're a psych student, or if you want a little bit more rigor, go to a research paper, go to Psych Info. These are 2 options that you have to kind of test your knowledge. Some of my students will be psych majors, and they'll want that other. Some of them aren't psych majors, but I still want to keep them engaged. So I give them 2 assignments that will still test them in the same ways. And then I have one more kind of. This is an assignment. We had to separate. I had too much stuff on one slide. Another assignment example that I give students is the option that if they've missed something, or if they're not participating in class, or if they've had low quizzes, they can do what I call replacement assignments. And that's built in, so if they miss a class, which shouldn't affect them overall, they can do one of these other assignments that has options so they can recoup and demonstrate that learning. They should be able to do up to 3 of those if they can miss 3 classes, if the goal is for them to learn that material. So I have a couple of options, and they're usually fun. They're not easy. So usually it disincentivizes them from missing. Because if they do miss, they have to write a paper as opposed to doing a quiz. But if they have to write this paper, will you go to the next one? I want to kind of show an example of. This is the description. If you miss something, here are some other opportunities. One is they can go to an event on campus that's registered here, and write and connect it to my class. It's a paper that they have to write. They have to identify the theme, but it forces them to kind of go into the community. Here, attend something. And they don't have to. It's a replacement. It's completely volitional. The other 2 is an autobiographical paper. So in my department, they have to take a class called autobiographical reading and writing. So they write their own memoir. Well, they can use the writing from that memoir to link it to this class. And students really find that kind of fun because they get to assess themselves. Are they normal? Are they not normal? Are they, how are they following along? And this is actually really quite a great tool because they get to investigate their own lives in a way that I don't normally do in class. So it's another option for them. And the last one is to participate in research in the psychology department. So it supports psych, but it also allows them another opportunity. If they don't want to write another paper, go support something in the industry. So this is completely volitional, but it gives them another few opportunities. And I usually try and add something here that might be a little bit more to their intrinsic liking.
We want you to, again, just think about, pull out your syllabus or assignment that you brought with you, or maybe something else has come to mind since we've been here today. And at your tables, we're going to give you about 8 or so minutes to chat with one another and talk about, again, just one element of that syllabus or that assignment that you might be able to tweak to better fit principles of UDL. Okay, we are going to come back together. We'd like to hear one idea from each group. So let's start in the back this time. Table 4. What was one thing that came up for you? That fits nicely with what Kate was talking about with executive function. So that planning, organization, prioritization, all of those things that happen before the task itself. How can we support students in getting there too? I found that oftentimes students will prefer to create a video. That was an example that I gave. I would have never chosen that. I would have chosen the written every day of the week. And then there's maybe students who, you probably talked about this, are learning English as a second language, international students who might prefer to write the information because they can organize it and go back to it and revise it, etc. So yeah, thank you for sharing those ideas. I think to Troy's point earlier, sometimes we do the way that we learned, right? And so opening that door to other opportunities and other options for students, I think will make things more accessible as well.
Okay, it's back to me. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what neurodivergent or neurodiverse burnout is. So it's very different from a neurotypical person's burnout. I really like the succinct kind of definition up here. Neurodiverse burnout is not overworking, it's over masking, it's over adapting. So chronic stress, plus having to mask your symptoms all the time, plus expectations, societal or personal, minus adjustments and support equals neurodivergent burnout. So neurotypical burnout is, I had this in my head, but it's kind of like floated away, but it's kind of, you have problems sleeping, or maybe like whether it's not getting enough sleep or oversleeping, you withdraw, things like that. But on top of neurotypical burnout, neurodivergent people can also experience things like reduced tolerance to stimuli. So there was here's an example from me. I was in a lunch meeting with my teammates, and we were in a restaurant, and it was so stupid loud, and I couldn't hear anything anyone was saying, and I got so overwhelmed that I had what was essentially an anxiety attack, and I had to go sit outside and have a timeout like a toddler. But it was in fact only last year, and I didn't understand what was going on, but really I was getting too overloaded with all the stimuli that was happening. So you can also experience executive function overload. So that might be I haven't cleaned up my apartment in 3 months because my executive function is not allowing me to make these simple decisions, things like that. Social withdrawal, temporary loss of speech and communication skills. I always use this as an example. By about 4 o'clock every day, after I've peopled a lot, I start losing my words, and it takes me longer to find words, and I'll go and I can see the word in my head, but I can't say it out loud because it just won't come to me. This especially happens on Wednesday nights for me because I work until 7 on Wednesdays to accommodate my adult learners that need evening appointments, and by about 6:30, I'm we got to wrap this up. I got to go home. I can't keep speaking out loud anymore. So it can be in terms of you can't find the words you're looking for, and you just kind of I'm not going to people anymore. I'm not going to talk anymore. Difficulty with daily living activities. So like I said, a lot of people with neurodivergent disorders might find it difficult to clean up after themselves. They're chronically messy, but it's not so much that they like the mess. It's just that I don't even know how to describe it because I'm a chronically messy person. So I don't like it, but it's just I'm going to do it later because I hate it. And then later is 5 months later. So you also start losing the ability to mask. So your symptoms become way more noticeable over time. So ways that you can kind of help re-engage students that are going through burnout, and I think especially with neurodivergent burnout, it can happen a lot more. I think it can happen a lot more quickly, but it can also be resolved a little more quickly than maybe neurotypical burnout, where you might be burnt out because you're working 50 hours a week, and also you've got kids and your parents are sick and this, and you've got too much stuff to do every day, and there's how do you alleviate that? How do you alleviate that? But with neurodivergent burnout, getting enough rest can kind of help reset you day by day. So rest is also relative. A lot of people with neurodivergent disorders have, especially people that are on the autism spectrum, have what's called a special interest. So one of my favorite kind of like TikTok, Instagram trends is like, what flavor of the tism did you get? And people are like, oh, here's my rock collection. And like, that's their special interest. Or this person was like, I like to cross stitch while watching Lord of the Rings. And like, that's their special interest. And like, that's rest to those people, is engaging in these activities that, you know, bring them joy and happiness, things like that. So it might not just be, oh, I'm gonna go to the spa and spend way too much money on like getting a facial and getting my eyebrows done. Speaking from personal experience last month. But I looked good, y'all. But I looked cute. But it might be resting and I'm gonna go play D&D with my friends for 7 hours. And that doesn't look like rest to the rest of us, maybe, but it's rest to that neurodivergent person. Managing energy levels using external accounting systems. So one of my favorite things is the spoons theory. Does anyone not know what the spoons theory is? Okay, so spoons theory is essentially, you say you've got 12 spoons for the day, and you've got various tasks you have to do, and for every task it might cost you 1 spoon, 2 spoons, 5 spoons. So let's say getting up and getting out of bed was 2 spoons, and then you got to make yourself breakfast, and you hate doing that. You hate trying to decide what you need to eat, and that is 3 spoons. And maybe then you got to take a shower, but like you hate the sensation of like shampooing your hair, and that's 5 spoons. So you have already used 5, 6. I have degrees in history for a reason. 5, 6, 7. That's 8 spoons already, and that's 3 tasks. So you have to start divvying up. I can't use the thing. I can't do the thing that costs me more spoons, so that I can reserve those spoons for later. So you'll hear people say, I don't have enough spoons for this. And if you've ever heard that on the internet, that's what that means, is I don't have enough spoons to do this. So that's a great thing that I like to help give to students, is it's a really great way to visualize the tasks that you have to do in a day. And you can say, maybe it would be a good way to help prioritize, like, this thing might cost you more spoons than you have allotted. Is there, can we table that for tomorrow? Or are there things that cost you less, but like those can be tabled? It's a great way to kind of externalize the amount of energy that a student can, or a person can expend on things. It's also, obviously, you want to acknowledge people's struggles and acknowledge that they're real and that what they're feeling is valid. This leads to acceptance, and acceptance leads to learning how to work with your neurodivergence instead of against it. So one of the things that I am always really intentional about is saying I live with XYZ, because I don't suffer from depression. I don't suffer from anxiety. I used to. I don't suffer from ADHD. I live with them, and they take up space in my brain. I'm trying to get them to pay rent, but like it's hard. But like I work with them. I don't work against them anymore. So allowing people the space to say these things and then giving them the validation that they need is monumental to a lot of people. And you don't even have to be neurodivergent to do it. So self-advocacy, this is really important, and it can get tricky because you can't advocate for someone until they advocate for themselves, but how does a person know what they need when they don't know what they need, So one of the things that especially I'm trying to do is practicing mindfulness. This can often be something that a lot of people with neurodivergence struggle with because of time blindness. And so it's things like, I haven't eaten in 18 hours because I was doing my special interest and I hyper-focused and I forgot. So practicing mindfulness about being in the moment and what is your body telling you that it needs and what it wants. Are you thirsty? Are you hungry? Do you need a cat nap? Do you need to go sit in a quiet space? One of the things that my sister, sometimes if I snap at her, she'll go, "Are you hungry?" And then I'll go, "Oh, I think I am." And she's like, "Let's go get you some chicken nuggets." So like being able to be in your body and know what your body needs is super cool. Setting boundaries. So learning how to say no to things. A lot of people with neurodivergence disorders will say yes to everything because they're like, I got to prove something. But setting hard boundaries and saying, no, I actually don't have time for this, or I don't need to do this, or, this and that can be really hard to do. I think everybody, no matter if you're neurodivergent or not, struggles with setting boundaries. So learning how to set boundaries, but also giving people space to even break their own boundaries is really important, because that's how we learn. So learning the difference between healthy and non-healthy masking and coping mechanisms, that's easier said than done. You really probably need a mental health professional to kind of help you parse through what's something that I have been doing my whole life and never realized is a coping mechanism that might actually be unhealthy, and then you have to unlearn it so that you can relearn things. So here's a healthy coping mechanism. Is a lot of people with neurodivergence lose things a lot, but I don't lose things a lot. But that's because I'm checking, did I put my keys where I put them always, and is my phone where I put it, and I'm always checking to make sure that my stuff is where I put it. But that's because probably when I was younger, I was always losing stuff, and so I learned how to kind of mitigate that. So that's a healthy one. Maybe not all the way healthy. I don't know. Sometimes you can get real tore up about where you put something. So explore strategies and choices together. So affirming people's choices, telling them you've got choice A or choice B, and then maybe what you would do, I would pick choice A, but they're like, no. For me, I'm going to do choice B, saying, okay, I got you. I have concerns, but here are my concerns, and I'm going to support you in that. Here are some strategies that I really like for, and this is also things you can do, especially when you don't really like a task that you're doing. Body doubling is a thing that you do where you and a friend might go sit in a restaurant, and you got to study, and you study together but separately, because you can kind of mirror what that person's doing. A lot of people do body doubling for cleaning. So I gotta mop the floor, and I have a group of friends that'll be like, okay, come on, we're all gonna get on Discord or Zoom or something, and we're all gonna clean our floors. And you're virtually body doubling, so that maybe it's not something you like, but you're watching other people doing something that you hate doing, and it helps you to do it. The Pomodoro technique is perfect. I was unintentionally doing this. I was unaware that I was doing this when I was doing my master's, and I was doing my master's dissertation. My master's is from England, so it's called a dissertation, not a thesis. Don't come at me. So I was doing my master's dissertation, and even though I loved it, I had to take small breaks all the time. So that's what the Pomodoro technique is. You can do as little as 5 minutes of the task, and then you would time it. And then you would do 5 minutes of rest. Or, say it's something that you don't like doing, you would start out slow, and then you would kind of ease up longer. Then you'd go, okay, 30 minutes, 5 minutes break. So Pomodoro technique is 10-10, recommend it. Habit stacking is also great. Maybe it's something that you don't like doing, but there's things that you are okay with doing. You stack them. So the thing you hate doing goes in the middle of the things that you're cool with doing. And then gamifying tasks. So you can essentially, you're making a game out of the tasks that you don't want to do. And you're points. Blah. So this is just a pretty cool chart that I have found on the interwebs. So it's just a way to kind of help stack how we can affirm neurodiverse people. I'm more than happy to send this out to folks, but just in the sake of time, I'm not gonna go too much into it. But it's kind of like, your food group pyramid. Coolest stuff is at the top. Obviously, connecting to resources. So CAPS is great, obviously. This is especially great if a student doesn't have a formal diagnosis, because CAPS can obviously help, get them to where they need to be. I will only refer to CAPS if a student says out loud, like, I'm struggling with my mental health. And then I'll say, oh, did you know that CAPS exists? Like, I won't say it without them prompting me, essentially. Accessibility Services Center, obviously, big ups to them in the room. I will always send people their way if they tell me, oh, I have a formal diagnosis in XYZ. Did you know that you can get accommodations for that? You should go over to them and talk to them. So I always do that if they have a formal diagnosis, because that means they've got a doctor that can attest to it. And then obviously other resources, the language lab, the writing center, the math science learning center, and the speech center, all great tutoring help that you can provide to students if they need a little outside help with academic things. Yeah, that's what I would do as an advisor, is file a care teams report, because then people can check in on that student in a confidential way, that isn't just saying like, hey, do you have this thing that we actually can't ask you if you have? So that's what I would do.
We just want to direct you again to your handouts. Lots of good information here. And then please do complete the survey. There are multiple ways for you to do that, either via the sheet on your table, the QR code that was included in your packet, and then also the link provided. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us.